They say that Black Lives Matter, but they really don't. And I don't mean that Black lives don't matter. I mean that they don't mean it when they say it. And it's so clear when you watch interviews like this and discussions like this that it's not about saving Black lives. It's just about power and control.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got another just wonderful show for you today on this Wednesday morning, I believe, although it feels more like a Thursday, I think. It's a Wednesday in disguise as a Thursday.
It's a wondrous Wednesday, Robbie. We'll have lots to discuss. Coming up on Rising, Jack Smith is firing back at the watchdog investigation against him. His legal team saying it is without merit.
Plus, good news for Uncle Herschel. Cracker Barrel says that they're reinstating that old logo we all love so much. Oh, isn't that nice?
Oh, fantastic. And President Trump is facing pushback from some on the right over his willingness to accept 600,000 Chinese students into the US. But before we get onto all of that, Robbie, what is on your radar?
Happy to tell you, Niall. Now, there was no more perfect encapsulation, in my view, of the Democratic Party's crime problem than Morning Joe Scarborough's bruising interview with Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson. Now, Morning Joe is of late a more moderate voice, I guess, among liberal commentators, and is using his platform to push the Democratic Party to move ever so slightly, a little bit, closer to the average voter's views on some issues like crime and policing. Many polls show broad public support for President Donald Trump's efforts to reduce crime, which have included deploying federal troops to Washington, D.C. Now, we should remain vigilant about increasing federalization of law enforcement because we don't want to live in a police state, and while also recognizing the inarguable successes associated with such an approach. Namely, D.C. finally had a murder-free week last week, thanks.
So DC had a murder-free week. Everybody should be able to celebrate that. Everyone should be happy about it. Everyone should be able to say, how long can we keep this going? How can we duplicate this in other cities, in other states? What did they do right? Now, there's always going to be things that were done wrong, but let's look at what we did right. And let's just celebrate that we had a week without murders, keeping in mind most of these murders are of Black people. So when they're saying Black Lives Matter should be the first people out there celebrating the success of this and saying, how can we take this back to Chicago?
In part to the presence of the National Guard. Trump thinks that what worked in D.C. could work elsewhere, and has suggested that other big cities beset with crime problems could benefit from an influx of federal troops and or resources. Chicago is one of those cities, but its far-left mayor, Brandon Johnson, is opposed to Trump's plan. And when pressed...
But the thing is, he's not opposed to Trump's plan. He's opposed to Trump. Anything that Donald Trump does or says, he is going to oppose, even if it's at the expense of his citizens, the people that voted him in and the people that will continue to vote in very poor Democratic leadership are being let down by this man. People are dying. Chicago is one of those places that it's pretty standard that every weekend, due to gang violence, people are being killed, not because of police officers, but because of gang violence. And they're happy to let that happen as long as it means that they can keep power, keep control, and keep telling people to vote for that Democratic Party. Stay on that plantation.
Asked by Morning Joe on whether the city should accept federal help, here's what Johnson said.
You believe that the streets of Chicago would be safer if there were more uniformed police officers on the streets of Chicago?
Easy question. Do you believe that the streets of Chicago would be safer if there were more uniformed police on the streets of Chicago? That's a layup all day. That's a layup. Let's see what he says.
I believe the city of Chicago and cities across America would be safer if we actually had, affordable housing. Look,
okay,
I'm not saying that
that's not the question I asked. My question is, and I just need a yes or a no, do you believe the streets of Chicago would be safer?
Johnson simply refused to directly answer the question and mentioned that he thought other things are more important than law enforcement. And so Morning Joe asked again.
If that's complemented by having 5,000 more cops on the streets of Chicago.
I don't believe that we should narrow it down to just police officers, Joe, is what I'm saying. That is an antiquated approach. I'm saying we've invested in detectives.
Mr. Mayor, are you hearing what I'm saying? I'm agreeing with you.
And this is Morning Joe. This is someone that is as anti-Trump as anyone else. But I do think that recently he's showing a little bit more common sense. And he may be one of the things that helps nudge the Democratic Party back into sanity. But for the fact that Brandon Johnson can't just say, yeah, having uniformed police, properly trained with the right approach to policing would help. He could say that. Like, nobody would oppose that. But he can't even say that because he doesn't even want to give part or partial credit to anything that this administration is doing. And his citizens are paying for his ignorance.
Okay, that's number 2. Now, after the second non-answer, Scarborough asked a third time.
If you get all of those other social programs that 800 million that New York City does, Los Angeles, other people do with great success, would an additional 5,000 cops on the streets in Chicago help complement those programs to make Chicago safer?
Look, we are working hard to make sure that our police department is fully supported. I don't believe that just simply putting out an arbitrary number around police officers is the answer.
It wasn't an arbitrary number, it was a specific number. But the man either does not believe or will not admit that more police on the streets would deter crime, even though we know it would. Look, this aspect of crime isn't complicated. If you have more police, you will get less crime. Except for the most far-left scholars of criminology, experts, even those who support criminal justice reform, as I do, agree that when you have more members of law enforcement patrolling the streets, busting the bad guys, and clearing cases, well, yes, you get less social disorder, not as many incidents of crime. The question is not really whether more police would help, it's whether national police are a long-term solution, whether other trade-offs are worth considering, like whether civil liberties are being undermined, and frankly, whether there's enough money to pull it off. Chicago, for example, is facing significant budget constraints. Reason Magazine's Christian Britschke notes that Johnson had to break a pledge not to raise taxes. In fact, he's had to increase taxes on everything, from digital streaming services to grocery bags to ride-sharing trips. He also tried to pass a $300 million property tax, but the city council killed it.
And these are all things that taxpayers are paying for. These are all things that, regular, hardworking people in Chicago have to finance, as well as the illegal immigrants that have been invited into the city because it's a sanctuary city. Now, I'm all for helping people. I'm all for helping those in need. But there's a difference between helping those in need who are U.S. citizens, people who have paid into the system, who have fallen on hard times, and people that have entered the country illegally. You may not agree with the laws, but the laws are there, and they have broken the laws to be in the United States. Once there were things put in place to try to remove them. And then you have people like Brandon Johnson say, no, come to our city. And then when people come to this city, all of the resources that the taxpayers in Chicago have contributed are being redirected. And now the administration is saying, we're going to help you with policing. We're going to help you reduce crime, that you can take credit for it in the long run, because that's what will happen if crime goes down. And he can't even say, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll take that. We'll help protect Black lives, because it's a lot of Black lives being lost every single weekend in Chicago. We'll take that help. Just take the help and stop being one of those people who anything that is being done by this administration, you have to oppose, even if it's to your benefit. Is he not bright enough or smart enough to realize that if crime goes down in his city, it will help the industry? Businesses will want to be open. Businesses will want to be there. There'll be more money in the economy. There'll be more companies that you can tax. But if you have an area where people don't even want to go out and eat, people aren't going to open restaurants there. So just take the help and let some Black lives be saved. Just like what happened in DC that they mentioned earlier, a week of no killings, a whole week. That's people's kids, that's people's nephews, sons, daughters that have been saved by this. Just let them give you the help.
My point is that Chicago might want to think about whether it's really going to say no to federal help. Getting our cities under control is, after all, very expensive work. And I thought the mayor really struggled in that interview. You can say that, look, I don't think, national police is a long-term solution to whatever problems we're facing, but you're not admitting that gravity exists and the sky is blue if you're not willing to say that more police would do something for crime.
And I get it. Before we go on, I get it. Niall and Lindsay and the other people on this show are here to be anti-Trump. But what he's about to say now is just ridiculous. And it's just one of these things that I've noticed liberal white people, but specifically liberal white men and liberal white women, will do to defend things that regular black folks aren't defending. We're not defending our streets being filled with criminals. We're not defending that. We want them off the street. But then you have liberal white males and females who don't live in these neighborhoods saying, oh, the policing isn't good. We don't want more police in those neighborhoods, because you're never in those neighborhoods.
So we disagree on this one in a few ways. One is in relation to Chicago. I think Brandon Johnson understandably has to be cognizant of the history in that city. Police officers in the street did not do much for Laquan McDonald when one of them murdered him in 2014. I was also looking, and this may appeal more to your libertarian values, between 2019 and 2023, the taxpayers of Chicago had to pay $384.2 million to settle complaints against the police for violating residents' rights.
All right, so these are complaints for violating residents' rights. It doesn't mean that they're founded complaints. It doesn't even mean they're valid complaints. And this is why I love the fact that they now have police cameras, because what they've shown is that a lot of these things that people would have complained about and still do because they don't know they're on camera are not legitimate complaints. If you're smoking weed in a stolen car with a gun and you run a red light and you get stopped and you complain because the police officer is telling you to come out the car, that's not a legitimate complaint. But it still goes down as a complaint, and then someone has to finance the defense of that complaint. So he's just doing what they do. They put out all these facts without context. They put out statistics without context. And when you break down or ask them to, well, let's parse these statistics, let's really look at these statistics, they mean absolutely nothing, or they prove the opposite to what they're trying to prove.
That came in turn slightly after the Department of Justice had to impose a so-called consent decree, which, as you know, happens when police departments are perceived to be in particularly egregious violation of people's rights. Now, as for the broader picture of police in the street, it doesn't seem to me as clear-cut as it seems to you. There was one study done, University of South Florida professor, drew together reports over decades about this issue of the correlation between more police on the street and reductions in crime. She took 62 studies, 32 agreed with you, and 30 said there was no real obvious correlation.
So he's talking about correlation. So he's saying some people did agree with the fact that there was a correlation, and some found that there was no correlation, but the outcome in both cases that there was less crime. So he's missing the point completely. There's a study of areas that have had more police that have also experienced less crime. And he's saying, well, in the study, X amount of people, more than 50% of the people said, yeah, there is a correlation of the police causing less crime. And the other people said that there wasn't a correlation, but there was still less crime. That's the point. The point is that there was less crime, fewer people dying. And in this case, usually it's gang violence and it's fewer Black people dying. So if Black lives really matter, that's what we should be looking at. How many fewer people are dying due to crime?
And so the argument is it about the number of police or about policing strategies? So, I don't really agree with your argument here. And in relation to the DC point, I would say that the opinion poll done by the Washington Post of DC residents came out with people massively opposed, 17% to 79% opposed to what Trump was doing.
Of people in DC.
Of people in DC.
Sure. I was talking about nationally where America is on crime. Well, you're getting to something. I think the trade-offs on civil liberties are worth considering. And sure, you can call it more effective policing, but I haven't looked at specifically the study you're referencing. And but my understanding is even progressives who want different policing strategies admit that. Right. If we had cameras everywhere, if we had surveillance state, if we had police all over the metro, yeah, there would be less crime. Now, we can't necessarily do that. We can't necessarily afford to do that. Right. And we wouldn't want to because it might be too disruptive. But whether it would deter crime itself is, I think, not as much of an open question, but maybe you can find some studies that suggest otherwise.
Well, no, I mean, you're talking about an all-out. In an all-out police state, would there be less crime?
Yeah.
Yes, there would, and we would consider the trade-offs to be bad in that respect,
But
right?
we wouldn't pretend that water isn't wet. We wouldn't say, and this is not even going to affect crime. No, it's going to deter crime. I mean, this is the project on some level of civilization, is deciding how much order you want and how much liberty you are willing to lose to get it.
Right.
And some of us want it here, and some of us want it here, and some of us want it here on this issue, but here on this issue. I mean, that's what it takes. But I would still say, I know Chicago is, I'm not exactly sure where it is on the ranking of crime cities right now. I bet it has more crime than its residents want to like. And while I'm civil liberties inclined and also am appalled by what happened to Laquan McDonald or what other examples are, that doesn't mean we still need to have policing services met some way or the other.
Yes, but I don't think...
The left just says, okay, then we'll have no policing. Like, well, then you're going to have greater disorder and greater death.
But it's not that they don't want policing. It's more that they just don't want it being implemented by this administration, because a lot of the crime reform happened during Clinton. And that's one of the reasons why Biden, who was a senator at that time, he took a lot of heat. So it's very partisan, and it's completely clear that it's not about saving lives. It's about retaining power. And the frustration that I have is always that, when you say you're going to put more police in a neighborhood, in a black neighborhood, then you're saying, oh, it's only because it's black and brown people in that neighborhood. But if they want to be protected and they need to be protected, that's where you need the police. Now, obviously, the police need to be trained properly, and the police need to respond with appropriate force, but you need the police there. And I would much rather live in a neighborhood where there are police officers than where there aren't police officers. So if Black lives truly matter, when you have a situation where a city or a place like DC has gone a whole week without any murders, we should just be happy about that. Let's see what we can learn from that, see how we can duplicate that and extend it, that there's a month, 2 months. That's what we need to do, because each soul that is lost is somebody's child. And we forget that, because it's easy to look at the big numbers and say, well, it was 20 deaths or, X amount of thousands of deaths for the year. But these are people's kids. And one death is too many. And if you can have law enforcement on the streets, that if you're a law-abiding citizen, it's not an issue to you. If you're not breaking the law, if you're not doing things that you're not supposed to do, they're not stopping you. They're only stopping those people who are committing the crimes. And we just need to be thankful that there's an administration who is willing to look at things more from a micro level than just a federal level. They're going into each city and saying, what can we do to make it better? But they just hate Trump so much. They just hate Trump so much that they can't even give him the win on this. But I think the other thing is, he's just getting too many wins, and they just can't take it.
Death.
Yes, but I mean, Brandon Johnson, he's not an anarchist. Like, he's not arguing that there should be zero police. Scarborough was concentrating on the provision of, what was the number he said, at 5,000 extra police. And Johnson was saying, well, it's actually more complicated than that, because there are social corollaries or correlations to criminal behavior. And if you just concentrate on policing, then you neglect those other factors, which seems to me a completely valid argument to make.
Yeah, I guess it's about what you emphasize, and I think the right would say that emphasizing the other things and spending vigorously on all those other programs, I would love that if that worked instead of having to have more police. I just don't know that they've pulled it off in any of these major cities.
I think it's a simple solution. You do need more police. You do need more police. Yes, you need more police who are better trained and who respond better, but you still need that show of force on the streets. If you know that you're riding down the street and you see police officers, even if they're just doing community stuff, they're just engaging with the community, talking to young people, it's better to have them there than to not have them there. And Democrats know this. They know that the whole defund the police thing was detrimental to the same people they claim to be helping. They know this, but they just can't give this administration a win. Anyway, that's it for me. Make sure that you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure that you share this channel with anyone who just wants to hear another view of things. So I don't call it for Democrats. I don't call it for Republicans. I just look at the facts and try to be consistent in calling balls and strikes. This is a really small channel, so if you've liked or enjoyed any part of this, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you leave comments. I do my very best to respond to the comments, even the ones that aren't very nice, because I do appreciate you taking the time to leave a comment, and I do appreciate you taking the time to watch. So that's it for me, and make sure you check out some of my other videos. I have a great video about the Cobra effect. So if you see that in the description, make sure you check that out, because that whole concept of the Cobra effect, where they talk about the fact that quite often good intentions don't necessarily mean you're going to get good results. And this is what we see time and time and time and time again, where people have good intentions, but the things that they put in place actually do more harm than good. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe. And as I always say, I'm just a guy with a Wi-Fi connection and a camera. I don't get it all right, but I do my best to at least be consistent, not be mean, and look at things in a critical way, that I'm thinking through the things and not just attacking people.